So a little overview of just how the session's going to go. We're going to start with Daniel Mays from Frith Farm, and he's going to share his own experience with plantings for beneficials. Then we're going to go to Laura Johnson from UVM Extension, who is newly in a role helping to talk about pollinators on farm. And then we're going to go to Amara Dunn from New York State, Cornell Cooperative Extension, also the state IPM team. And she's going to talk about beneficials in terms of predators and parasitoids, maybe helping us identify. I know I always get a couple pictures every year of like, is this a good bug or a bad bug? And so hopefully we can get into some of that. And if you've all had a chance to look over the ground rules, I'll stop screen sharing and we can.
Thanks, Caleb. Thanks everyone for being here in this virtual world. I'm just going to jump right into my presentation. I figure a lot of photos might be helpful to just share what we do here at Frith Farm. We're in Scarborough, Maine. Let me see if I can share this. Oh, hold on. Sorry, it's been a minute. There we go. All right, so here we are. Yeah, going to talk about how we try to provide habitat for beneficials here on Frith Farm. So first, I'll just give a really fast overview of our farm so you sort of know our context. We're in Scarborough. I bought this land 11 years ago. That's what it looked like. It was an open hayfield and a falling down house. And over the last decade, this is a nice drone image courtesy of one of our customers. Yeah, we turned it into 3 acres of vegetable production. We're no-till. And we have 9 full-time seasonal employees, April through November. And we bring in about 300,000 revenue from about half of that's from CSA, and then we do local natural food stores and an on-farm market. So yeah, beneficial plantings, I see them, there's so many benefits of them. You know, I think this presentation is mostly about attracting beneficial insects, but I just wanted to highlight some of the other benefits that really stack together well. So yeah, first when you say beneficial plantings, that could be anything. There's lots of names for those, like hedgerows, field borders, cover crops that flower, cash crops that you let flower, perennial gardens, all of it. So yeah, that's what I mean by beneficial planting. And the benefits of those are, yeah, that can help create a sort of ecosystem pest control with pest populations held in check by natural predators. Also attract pollinators to you know, increase pollination on your crops. I also think of them as an underground reservoir of perennial diversity, because those having perennial roots in the ground just creates a whole different set of diversity underground, all the microbes that can then seep out into the rest of the farm. And then, yeah, there's economic diversity. Hedgerows or any of these plantings can also be, can bring in revenue with berries or fruits or herbs, what have you. And then last but certainly not least, it just makes the farm a beautiful place, which makes everybody happy, which has all sorts of value, economic and otherwise. So yeah, moving on. So yeah, they can take all different forms. This is our pick your own flower garden for CSA members. So they get to pick their flowers each week. But this is all sorts of, you know, diversity and nectar for beneficial insects as well. And then, yeah, cover crops. Buckwheat is sort of a classic for really good flower production for beneficial insects. But there are other crops as clovers and things that, yeah, part of your cover cropping for building soil can also just be feeding insects. Also, we let certain crops, cash crops, we just, instead of, you know, flipping the bed, we let them hang on and flower. So this is cilantro and then dill behind it. We let those flower, and we actually let them self-seed as well, but that's just a whole lot more flowering diversity in the farm. So yeah, don't mow unnecessarily. If we actually build extra time into the crop plan for certain crops to let them flower, being careful to terminate them before they set seed unless we want them to, because they can become weeds. Then we undersow. Sweet alyssum is a great crop to undersow. It attracts lots of little insects with smaller mouthpieces, and it flowers all season long, which is wonderful. So, and the seed is very inexpensive. So undersowing that in onions or garlic or tomatoes, or interplanting with other herbs and flowers. Here's another, sweet alyssum under the tomatoes. I can plant perennial herb gardens. A lot of the perennial herbs, flower and attract all sorts of great insects. And then, we also planted fruit trees throughout our sort of perimeter pasture, and different flowering perennials at the base of the trees. And then, just every little nook and cranny of the farm can become habitat, rather than just mowing it clean and keeping it like lawn. Can plant little beds and just leave certain places unmowed, and they will turn to wildflower meadow pretty quickly. So thinking I was doing all those things pretty much from the start, but then I started really getting drinking the Kool-Aid on this and getting nerdy about it. And I looked at this chart. I was reading some books on natural predators, and then just showing basically this chart just tells me the closer your flowering diversity is to your crop, the better natural predator control there is. So I came up with an ambitious goal, since I'm on we grow very small scale intensive. I said, well, let's try to get flowering diversity within 50 feet of every single crop on the farm. So to do that, we installed beneficial beds, I call them. Every 13th bed in our field is a perennial sort of mini hedgerow of flowering perennials. So here are some photos of those. And the goal here is to have flowering, a diversity of flowers in bloom from early spring through late fall. So there's a continuous nectar supply, and this right up against and in the middle of our annual vegetable production. Notice we also put bird houses in there, sized for eastern bluebirds, which are another natural predator, if you will. So it's not just limited to insects. Here's another, that one's in spring. This photo is in fall. So there's flowering, a variety of flowers throughout the year as a continuous food supply. Here's some more photos of those. I figure photos are worth 1,000 words. This looks more like in the early summer. And we put dwarf fruit trees in there as well, apple trees. There's some berry bushes in there. Sort of fun to just watch these evolve throughout the season. Here's another one, and another one. And I just wanted to highlight, there's all the benefits of insect control and diversity, but there's also such a benefit to just living and working in a beautiful place, which for me is maybe the number one, or maybe they're all related. Really, they're all the same benefit. And if the goal is to attract a diversity of life, well, that's what they're doing, and humans are included in that. The goals I have for those hedgerows and for these plantings in general are, I think, like I said, to provide plants with overlapping bloom periods from early spring through late fall, and to just have as much diversity and abundance of those plants as possible, all as close as possible to the crops. And then also, this often gets overlooked, I feel like, but native shrubs and bunching grasses for overwintering habitat. It's great to feed the pests all through the growing season, but if they have nowhere to overwinter, afterwards, then you got to start from scratch the next year. So yeah, thinking about that overwinter habitat, which can be a challenge because it's also lovely habitat for rodents and other maybe unwanted animals as well. And then yeah, lastly, this is a tough one, but we don't spray at all. We do spray even organic pesticides. I feel like keeping low levels of pests present is actually part of this whole system, because natural predators, like their name implies, rely on those pests as part of their life cycle. Maybe they feed off of them, or maybe they parasitize them. It's part of their reproductive life cycle. So keeping low levels of those pests present is actually beneficial in the long run. So I struggle a little bit with the just very simple good bad distinction, because I think they're all actually part of the same system. It's just a matter of keeping it in balance. So here are some shrubs we use for hedgerows. These are woody shrubs. Depending on how much space you want to devote to the hedgerow, you know, that determines what shrubs will fit. So in general, shrubs are about as wide as they are tall. So if they're listed, if they just list their height, you can assume they'll be about that wide. So if you want to devote, you know, 10 or 15 feet to a hedgerow, these are great shrubs, most of them native. And I think this is getting recorded and shared, so I don't need to read all that. And if you want to do a smaller hedgerow, ours are smaller, more like 5 feet wide. We stick to mostly these, and which also you can look that many of these are actually produce you know, yield marketable crops. So again, your hedgerow doesn't have to be single purpose. And then all the herbaceous perennials that die back to the ground over the winter, but then regrow from the roots. Mostly our hedgerows are these, since they're smaller, narrower, and yeah, trying to, you know, have as much diversity and continuous bloom as possible. So kind of these are listed roughly in order of bloom period, early spring to late fall. And then yeah, the native grasses, big and little blue stem, are great for overwintering habitat. So yeah, again, just as much diversity and abundance of different flowering plants as possible is kind of this simple strategy we use. And it really gets fun to try to pack in as much diversity and as much beauty as possible around every nook and cranny of the farm. So this is our little farmstead with a CSA pickup biz in our farm store. And yes, this is my amazing crew this year, who also are attracted to bright, colorful flowers. So thanks all. That's what I got.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Does anybody have any questions to throw into the chat? Well, we've got a few minutes here. We'll do more general farmer to farmer type discussion at the end, but if there's any specific to what Daniel was just saying, I can attest for the beauty of Frith Farm. I recommend taking a tour. I know, Daniel, you have some every once in a while. So keep an eye out for those if you're in the area near Scarborough. Oh, okay, we got a question. How long have you had the perennial hedgerows in place?
Yeah, I'd say it's 4 years now.
And do you feel like I'll do my follow-up. Do you feel like you've, as they've established and just been there for a longer period, have you noticed a difference in activities within and around those hedgerows from that first year to now?
Absolutely. Yeah, I should really highlight that. Like, I'll say as soon as we put up those birdhouses, like within days, there were just bluebirds everywhere on the farm, which was amazing. The insects took a little longer. It wasn't instantaneous, but by now there's like just so many different insects. It's kind of like an ID challenge every time you walk through there to see if you can figure out what they are. All the funky wasps and flies and bees. So yeah, I really noticed a difference Yeah, and I don't know, it sounds sappy, but like I feel like there's just an attraction to those spaces for me, and I feel like it is the same for other organisms. So it's just, it creates a wonderful habitat just for more life.
Yeah, I feel you on that. Your surroundings really impacting yourself as well.
Mm-hmm.
Another question about annuals versus perennials. You mentioned alyssum as an annual that you interseed, and some other ones that you're interplanting. And this maybe is a question that we'll revisit after Laura's talk on pollinators as well. But any differences as far as value to pollinators?
Yeah, definitely. You can like get into the details of like which pollinators are attracted to which flowers. But ones that I've found really attract, like parasitic wasps, are like sweet alyssum, and predators of what are the ones in the, like thrips. I have a theory that alyssum helps alliums not have as many thrips, and yeah, then the just the crops that I see a lot of awesome diversity on in terms of insects are yeah, cilantro, dill, things in the carrot family are really great. And then yeah, all those lists I did of the perennial flowers, a lot of fun insects on there. Bone set is one that I really love. It gets lots of funky, rare insects on it.
Yeah, I think I can back you up a little bit on that alyssum and thrips, and marigolds is another good one. It feeds minute pirate bugs that like to eat thrips, I believe. Amara, you can always jump in if I'm going in the wrong direction here, but I think that's true.
Yeah, I haven't heard about marigolds, but you may very well be correct. I know whenever I pick cosmos or sunflowers from my garden, I have minute pirate bugs falling onto my desk from the cut flowers. So they really love pollen. I have a couple resources that I've seen and used and people like that I can put in the chat if that's useful.
That'd be fantastic. All right, let's see what more I can get through before we jump on to Laura's presentation. But do you propagate most of your own plants or purchase them? And do you have any favorite sources for plants? And can I make my guess? I bet you purchased initially and now you're propagating.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And Fedco is a great place for perennials here in Maine or the Northeast. And yeah, by now we actually propagate and we sell a lot of them too. We have sort of a unplanned nursery business all of a sudden because all these perennials are just so easy to propagate. So we sell a lot of both woody and herbaceous perennials.
Cool. And then this last question, maybe it'll be something you could throw into the chat. It's a question about resources. And if you have any resources that you recommend for learning about companion planting or permacultural plant guilds or other methods that you use in deciding which plants you're going to pair up with certain beds maybe, or with other plants. And with that, I think we can probably let Laura start to share her screen, and I'm sure we'll get back to lots more of this in the end discussion.
Oops. Can you see?
Not yet.
No. Share.
All right, it looks like it's starting to come about now. There we go.
Okay, can you see everything on my slide? I have a funky box in front of mine.
It looks like the left side's maybe a little cut off. I see supporting pollinators on diversified farms.
Huh, I wonder why. Hold on, let me try. What's going on there?
While you're figuring that out, another question came through for Daniel about impressed that he avoids spraying so much, and wondering if you're using row covers is, I think, maybe part of the meat of that question, as well as some other stuff that maybe we can get into in the chat.
Sure, yeah. We definitely use row cover, especially in the spring for flea beetles. But yeah, I think just keeping that balance among all the different plants we're growing, I think pests are a symptom of imbalance. So yeah, they're a symptom of a lack of diversity, a lack of life. So to me, the solution of killing life to solve the problem of a lack of life is kind of like a downward spiral potentially. So I've just chosen, within my philosophy, not to do that. And I've really seen the rewards over years of just focusing on diversity and soil health instead. But yes, we do use row cover, and we screen out cucumber beetles from our cucumber tunnels. So exclusion is physical exclusion we do employ.
Great, thank you, Dan.
And Laura, that's looking great.
Okay, this looks normal now.
Yep, that looks perfect.
My Zoom video is a little wonky, so I think there's something going on with the program on my computer. So, but I'm glad it looks normal to you now. So I'll start. My name is Laura Johnson, and I work with the University of Vermont Extension Program, and I am the pollinator support specialist. And today I'm just going to be talking a little bit about my journey so far. My position is new at the university, so just started this July, trying to change the screen here. There you go. So I just want to start off by thanking the Vermont Vegetable Berry Growers Association, who has helped get my position going as pollinator support specialist. And so they are a wonderful partner to work with as we move forward. And I'll be mentioning a couple other partners at UVM I've been working with, but my role is really to just disseminate. There's a lot of really amazing information out there. I saw in the chat, I think Amara mentioned Xerces and the Xerces Society, and just helping to disseminate that information with growers, and also to coordinate research. So the Gund Institute at UVM has been doing a lot of work with pollinators and looking at habitat and solar panels, and they've also been doing a lot of work specifically with high bush blueberry pollination. So they've been great to work with so far, and if they're a great resource for high bush blueberry. So today I'm just going to talk about likely pollinators you'll find on diversified farms in the Northeast. And then I'd like to specifically talk a little bit about squash and pumpkins in that context of the common pollinators. And then if there's time, get into some habitat options. And Daniel covered some of what I have too. So we can maybe just expand with some more photographs given time. So we can't really talk about pollinators without talking about the fruits of their labor, and just a quick snapshot of an apple cut along the equator, and that classic 5-pointed star that you get in the middle. Each of those star spaces, or each of those spaces within that star, is a seed chamber, which can hold up to 2 seeds. And if you've got a full set of 10 seeds, or between 6 and 10, that's a well-pollinated apple. And anything below that, you're probably going to have misshapen fruit or early fruit drop. But just an example of good pollination. And then some examples of maybe less successfully pollinated crops, some peppers that were greenhouse grown. On the left in that picture, those peppers were honeybee pollinated, and then on the right, pollinators and bees were excluded from the greenhouse. So just noting yield and size differences of different crops. Again, strawberries, well-pollinated strawberries versus less well-pollinated strawberries or non-pollinated strawberries. So getting into like who are the animals that are helping make this possible. And there's 7 taxa or group of pollinators, and I'll just quickly go through those. There's bees, moths, butterflies, flies, beetles, wasps, and birds, and particularly hummingbirds. Bats are another pollinator, but within the Northeast, it's these are the main 7. And to my knowledge, bats are not are significant pollinators in the Northeast, but anybody who wants to speak up and offer other information, I welcome that at any point in the conversation here. So all these pollinators are facing similar threats. There's generally worldwide, there's decline in particularly insects. And that's due to the loss of habitat and resource diversity, pests and pathogens, pesticides, and climate change. And something that I've been kind of grappling with being in Vermont and in New England and in the Northeast is that, we live in a really diverse landscape. And, I kind of think about like, well, we have like a lot of really great habitat, and maybe this doesn't apply to us, but when you dig into the numbers, there are species in our part of the world that are also we're finding in decline. And so there's numerous beetles, 58 moths and butterflies, 6 bumblebees. So despite the beautiful part of the world that we live in, we are also not immune to these declines. And then I wrote other bees with a question mark there because there isn't quite enough information in terms of assessing losses specifically of other bees. And in Vermont, and I know in other states, and I know in New York, and I'm not sure if in each New England or Northeastern state there is organization doing this, but the Vermont Center for Eco Study is currently documenting other bees, meaning like non-bumblebees and non-honeybees, looking at declines or assessing population and abundance so that we can better have a sense of declines as we move forward in the future. So I'm going to focus a little bit on bees in this talk. There's a lot, all of those pollinators I mentioned before are really important, but bees contribute to 80% of all pollination services. And while the other groups contribute to 20%. So thinking about, in the farmscape, what that means for habitat and resources and what's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. And bees are super important. So 20,000 species worldwide, 4,000 in the US, and in Vermont, there's around 330 species. And of the numbers I've been seeing in other New England states, it's similar, plus or minus. And bees contribute to $18 billion in pollination services, and wild bees contribute to $3 billion of that in the US economy, agricultural economy. So the first question I'm going to ask is looking at this picture, are both of these pictures of bees? And you can just, if you can just take a moment either to type it in the chat box, or I welcome anybody to unmute, but if you want to just type in the chat box, yes or no. So getting a few responses here, yes, no, yes, no. They look like bees, and there's actually one bee and one fly. And so the one on the right is a drone fly or a syrphid fly, and it is it's designed to look like a bee and mimic bees, and particularly a drone bee, which is a male. And so at first glance, it looks like a bee, but it's actually a fly, but also an important pollinator, as we mentioned before. And then this is a bumblebee on the left. And another question that I want to put out there, and if you could just think about like what physical characteristics might be different about these two insects that really sticks out to you. Just one word answer. Is there one thing that sticks out that's different between them? I see fuzzy hairs. Yes. Sting versus bite. Wings seem different, furry, hairs on the bee. So yes, the hairs are a primary difference between bees and other types of pollinators. And it's not to say that flies or wasps or butterflies and moths don't have hairs, but bees are particularly hairy, and some have specialized hooked hairs that will gather and collect pollen and more efficiently than other types of pollinators, and others on their hind legs. Other species of bees will have something called a corbicula, which helps them to carry pollen around, which I'm sure you've seen pollen baskets on bumblebees and honeybees, for example. Bees also entirely rely on pollen and nectar for food. Something like a wasp is also carnivorous and can get other sources of protein, which is what pollen provides. So bees totally rely on those two resources from flowers. So I think that's all I wanted to say about that. Oh, and if you really want to dial in on differences, bees have 4 rings versus flies have 2. Forward. There. So now I want to just distinguish between, there's managed bees and there's also wild bees. And managed bees are probably as easy to control as a cat, which is the image I chose here, because you can pretend to try and manage them, and to some degree you can, but they have their own thing going. And the one particular type of managed bee that I'm going to just highlight are honeybees. And it's kind of this, honeybees are a wonderful ambassador species for bees and pollinators, and they give us a lot of really excellent products from their hives and their hard work: honey, pollen, royal jelly, beeswax, propolis, and bee venom. But they're also considered livestock by the USDA. So I just want to make that distinction about honeybees and how they might be different than wild bees, where they're not being actively managed by, or honeybees are actively managed by farmers, by apiarists. And you can find wild honeybees, and not as much to my knowledge in the Northeast. I am a honeybee keeper myself, and that's been my first exposure to honeybees, to bees and pollinators. And now I've been diving into the wild pollinator world, which is really my position, tries to focus on more within the farm context. And those of you, if anybody is using honeybees in their farms, I'd be curious to see that also in the chat. If you rent honeybee hives, or if you manage honeybee hives on your on your farm, specifically for pollination services, that would be, that's interesting to me. I do know some growers around me who actively rent honeybees for pumpkin pollination. And you can expect, if you're renting hives, that a healthy pollinating colony will have 15 to 20,000 pollinating bees out of 60 to 100,000 total bees in a colony. And in pumpkins, you would normally stock about 1 to 3 hives per acre, and you can expect to pay $185 to $200 per colony with that rental. Something else I wanted to note about honeybees and pollination services specifically, as compared to wild bees, is this map here is just looking at different temperatures. And really 53 is, depending on your colony. Every colony has a personality for sure, but 55, 56 degrees is really the low baseline temperature that you're going to see honeybees out and doing their job. Really anything cooler, they're not going to do much in terms of pollination services. And, the sunnier and warmer it is, the more active that they're going to be. Wild bees, on the other hand, are much more resilient in variable weather conditions. So cool, rainy weather doesn't necessarily prevent a wild bee like bumblebees from coming out and foraging for pollen and nectar. So they're a lot more tolerant. And so by encouraging that diversity of bees, you're helping ensuring those pollination services in your landscape and on your farm. Bumblebees are also, or not only bumblebees, but wild bees tend to be more efficient pollinators, not only because of their ability to be more active in variable weather, but a bumblebee can do the same pollination service with one flower visit as it would take 3 visits from a honeybee. So it's just a good investment to diversify and encourage diversity, as you all are probably already doing. So these are some of the, I tried to distinguish, and this is not an all inclusive list, but between, crops that are wind pollinated that absolutely require animal mediated pollination, and what crops may just benefit from pollination services from insects or other animals, and then other crops that don't require pollination, and thinking about that in terms of marketable harvests. So something like lettuce and spinach, if you are growing that to sell, you don't really need pollinators to improve your crop. But if you're growing something like tree fruit, apples, peaches, plums, pumpkins, melons, squash, those are all, they absolutely require animal mediated pollination services. And I just saw an article the other day about money and research going towards mechanical pollination and greenhouse production. And I know that in parts of China, there are apple orchards where honeybee keepers are refusing to bring their bees because of, I believe, pesticide usage. And so they are having to do manual pollination of their apple trees. So if you can imagine doing that and the amount of time and labor that would take, animal mediated pollination is, at least for me, seems like would be the preference. So I want to get into a little bit specifically about squash and pumpkin, and this being one of those crops that are completely dependent on insect pollinators. And as you are likely aware, they have the female and the male flower. So needing an insect to bring the pollen from the male flower to the female flower. And this is just looking at, what that might look like if that was done, if that was not done. So a picture of a zucchini squash on the left, and that resulting, I'm sure you've seen this on your farms, kind of tapered end or misshapen fruit. And then, I don't know, I thought that these pumpkins looked pretty okay pollinated, but then I got some feedback from somebody that said that they didn't look very well pollinated to them. So my thought process as I go through this and think about pollinators on farms is like, will people buy it? And is it good enough for sale? And to me, these pumpkins look okay, but it might be up to you as the grower. But as a consumer, I would buy those. So in the Northeast, you can expect 38 different species of bees to be visiting your squash and pumpkin flowers. And that'll vary depending on, the state that you live in. And I'm just going to talk a little more specifically about who these bees are. And you may or may not recognize them when you're out in the field doing work, but knowing who they are, where they live, and their behaviors, I think can be helpful when thinking about implementing some management practices if you're specifically hoping to encourage pollinators on your farm. So bees can be distinguished between specialists and generalists. And, do they go to all and any type of flower, or do they just go to one particular type of flower? Do they live alone? Are they solitary, or are they social like honeybees? Uncommon versus common, and the distance at which they can fly. And I like Daniel's point about a 50-foot goal. And because having more resources close by your crops is certainly going to make it easier for bees to reach them. And if we just think about ourselves, I know for me, I'm going to go to the nearest grocery store as opposed to the one that's 100 miles away. So, and then you can also distinguish bees in terms of their nesting sites. So we've got ground nesters, cavity nesters, and tunnel nesters. And for squash and pumpkins, we're really going to look more at ground and cavity nesters as key species. So honeybees are, an important and common pollinator, squash and pumpkin. And this is a, diversified vegetable farm that rented a couple hives for pollination services in my area here in Vermont in the Connecticut River Valley. And when you think about social bees, it usually means that they have a queen and a team of worker bees and then drone bees. And honeybees can fly up to 3 miles. So even if you're not keeping them, you're probably seeing them on your crops. And then bumblebees. I should mention that honeybees, their nesting type is a cavity, and like bumblebees are also cavity nesters. So cavity nesting bees will use an existing space in order to rear their offspring. So in bumblebees, it might be an old rodent hole or something, whereas honeybees, we're providing them that space, but you might find them in hollow tree trunks. Bumblebees are also, they're generalist species. Honeybees are as well. They'll go to basically any pollen or nectar source that you provide for them. They're social, and depending on the species, their colonies may be bigger or smaller. They're common, and bumblebees can fly about 2 miles for food and water. And then this next bee I wanted to touch on is the squash bee. And this is a little different in that squash bees are specialists. So they only will visit those large pumpkin and squash, zucchini flowers. So you won't find them on other cucurbits like melons and cucumbers. They just go to those bigger flowers. And these are ground nesting bees. They can fly between 1/4 mile to 1 mile. So if you're looking to cultivate this particular species of bee, it's good to keep your rotations within that range. And this is just looking at image of their nesting below ground. And on the right, we've got the squash crop or zucchini crop, and what a congregation of these solitary bees might look like. So as a solitary bee, there's just one female bee, and she goes and lays her eggs in the nest, some of which are male and some of which are female. And so thinking about, tillage practices, these nests are between 6 and 9 inches in depth, and recognizing that in farm management as well. So it's a pretty unique bee. It's not yet found in parts of the United States. It is naturalized in native but I believe it, like in Oregon, they're just starting to find this bee in their squash. So, but we do have it here in the Northeast. And you'll notice that this is a very similar slide to the previous one. And this is just looking at the cuckoo bee, which is a parasitic bee and also a pollinator. And it's a parasite to the squash bee. And so you'll find them living and laying their eggs in where the squash bee has excavated their ground nest. So, and then finally, an important group of bees in squash and pumpkins are sweat bees. And these are also ground nesting bees. And if you didn't notice my note, about 70% of all bees are ground nesters, and the other 30% are either cavity or tunnel nesters. So creating that space for those ground nesting bees can be helpful if you want to encourage their presence on your farm. And these sweat bees are not very far flyers, you know, just a few, couple to a few hundred feet. And they're generalist bees as well. They're also solitary and maybe a little less common. You can also find them sometimes in rotted wood. So thinking about like your field edges or where you might dump you know, prunings or fallen trees and how that might just provide some habitat for some of these species. So we've heard from Daniel about all the great practices he's trying out on his farm for these pollinators. And if you don't mind, maybe if you have something on your farm that you've been doing, sharing that in the chat as well. If you're, you know, have perennial plantings or mowing differently than maybe you have in the past, whatever it might be in terms of what are you doing, if you are doing anything to actively promote pollinators on your farm. And I'm just going to go through some pictures quickly of what I've been seeing so far as I've been in this role this past season on farms here in Vermont. So when we think about nesting sites, I mean, when we think about habitat, there's nesting and then there's food and water. And when we think about safe nesting sites, that might look something like Daniel mentioned bunch grasses. And in this center picture here, this is a high tunnel where they've got some fall raspberries going. And if you notice around, this is a perennial fruit farm where I took this picture. Around the row end, they planted some bunch grasses, which as they kind of fold over, as you see in the picture here, they start to create that habitat for bees. And I know, you know, in thinking about this, fairly, at least I see it's very common to be mowing around high tunnels, and rodents can be a real issue, but also keeping in mind that that is potential habitat if you're growing something like fruits, that it could be potential bumblebee habitat as well. And then on the left, this other picture next to it is some just prunings laid in a hedgerow on the field edges, which again, for those cavity nesters like bumblebees, which are super important in squash and pumpkin pollination, might find some habitat there as well. And it's out of the way of cultivation and production as well. And then just an example of a squash bee nest hole where you might see those solitary squash bees or cuckoo bees flying in and out. And then I haven't talked too much about tunnel nesters. They aren't, at least what I've been finding, and please, if anybody knows differently, they aren't significant pollinators in squash and pumpkin, but they are really important for, you know, tree fruit and other types of fruit. And these are just examples for like mason bees, types of habitat you might be able to cultivate on your farm. And the far right picture is just some raspberry canes put into I think a tile, it looks like an old tile drain or something. And then thinking about food and water, so pollen and nectar resources, and supporting all those, particularly those generalist bees that will go for anything, like the sweat bees and the bumblebees and honeybees, when your crop is not in flower, and making sure that there are sufficient resources all year long. And you can do that in a lot of different ways. And, you know, there's annual and perennial ways. And just what I've been seeing on farms and in my research so far, as I've been diving into this world of pollination on farms, these are some examples. Some mustard, which I know some folks plant for as a biofumigant, is also a really great pollinator attractant. And I will also just mention with mustard, and based on my observation and observations by other farmers and colleagues, is the honeybee is really seems to be attracted to mustard. So this picture on the left was in a field that had all other kinds of floral resources, a lot of asters, sunflowers, and other types of wildflowers. And there was like a diversity of bees on everything else. But this small area of mustard was only honeybees, which I thought was really interesting to notice. And then we've got classic buckwheat, great pollinator attractant. And then Daniel mentioned sweet alyssum, and that's a strip within this is a cucumber field, but you know, could just as easily be in a squash field as well. And then I don't know if anybody is planting Phacelia as a cover crop, but another great pollinator attractant. And my understanding is that it takes a little longer to establish. And so in planting it in a mix with buckwheat kind of prolongs the flowering potential of those cover crops together. And I know in the literature, you see a lot of, you know, kind of warnings about buckwheat and not allowing it to reseed. And when thinking about annual cover crops and strips, you know, typically you would terminate a cover crop, and depending on the goals, that might be right at peak flowering, like with mustard. But you could also think about just maybe leaving a strip not terminated if you have the space, or leaving strips of cover crop for a season and just letting it continually flower. And with buckwheat, I know in Vermont, there's one particular farm that just let it go all season, and to see if it would, you know, become the weed that you see kind of warnings about in the literature, and it never came back. It seemed to winter kill, and they had to replant it. So knowing your farm's environment and how crops behave in your particular landscape can be helpful in planning for floral strips, or just experimenting. And then just some a mix of sunflower and sorghum for some late forage. And then this particular farm I was on had enough land base where they could do 3-year rotations between cover crops and cash crops. And they had strips of white clover, rye, and Austrian peas in cover crop, where they would, you know, in a few years plant a cash crop. And the Austrian peas over winter, providing a great spring flower, and white clover is a great, you know, all season flower for pollinators and bees in particular that might pollinate your squash and pumpkins. And then thinking about the alleyways between fields that may be in perennial systems, and just grassy alleyways, and incorporating clovers into that space, or maybe it's just around your barn, or wherever you're not going to be tilling. And you can do that either with frost seeding and broadcast seeding in this late winter, or use a no-till drill. And then thinking about these dual purpose plantings, here on the left, some Jerusalem artichoke, which is a really great attractant to native bees, and also can be a great marketable crop. And we've got some lettuce that was left to go by and flower on the top right-hand corner. And then also on this farm, on the bottom photo, they're experimenting with, they've got their sweet corn here, but they're going to be installing, as Daniel mentioned, these kind of mini hedgerows of perennial wildflowers. And then in the center, they've got a strip of perennial fruit trees. So trying to making those, perennial landscapes more diverse between annual plantings. This is the same farm doing the same system between two high tunnels. And then on the perennial fruit farm, some experimentation with Haskap shrubs between greenhouses to act as a sort of cash crop for those raspberries in those high tunnels. And then finally, just thinking about, what's in your natural landscape already, and maybe reducing mowing if possible. And there's kind of a initiative out there to promote a no mow May. So like when violets and dandelions are really coming up, leaving those bees, or leaving those growing, and allowing early season pollinators to feed on those. And then if you have like a field that you typically mow every fall to keep cleared from, shrubs or, forest kind of encroaching on your land base, if it's possible to kind of rotationally mow that area every year, so maybe mowing half or just a third every year, and throw it the next year, mowing the next third or half, so that bees and other pollinators have that space as habitat to overwinter in, is another kind of like, I think, low-hanging fruit, easy option for encouraging that habitat. So I think, and the last thing I wanted to mention about distance, which I've already touched on a little bit, but this is just a picture of a football field. And that is typically the distance at which, if you can imagine, at most you would want to have floral resources outside of crop bloom for pollinators that you're trying to attract. So that's all that I have for today. And I also, if it's okay, have we are collecting information right now because, as I mentioned before, we're in the beginning of our program and building the program and writing grants and looking for funding. And so we have a survey that we just sent out to the Northeast that is looking at grower practices and regarding pollinators. So if you don't mind, I'll copy and paste that survey link in the chat. And if you don't mind taking the time to go through it, it takes 2 to 3 minutes, and do it now or later. But that would be a great help. We've gotten responses from all states so far, except for I think Rhode Island is the only one that I'm trying to hit still. But I just put that there.
Thank you so much, Laura. I think just in the interest of saving time for discussion later on, I'll just ask, I'm gonna pick on some audience members that I happen to notice their names as we're gearing up for Amara's presentation. I know that we have some breeders of cucurbits from Johnny's in the audience. And you mentioned about some of the crops that absolutely require pollination and some that benefit from it. And I'm wondering, we have more and more parthenocarpic cucurbit crops, and those are that $5 word just means it doesn't strictly require pollination to bear fruit. It can have sterile seeds and still bear fruit. And I'm wondering if our breeders can back up what I think is true, that they still, you get a better crop, a better yield, a bigger fruit, or maybe better fruit set if pollination occurs, even if it's a parthenocarpic variety. Do either of you from that cucurbit team at Johnny's feel comfortable unmuting?
Our team hasn't really looked at that very much. It's more been on the trialing side, but I'm pretty sure that I agree with you that they would do better with pollination.
Cool, thank you. I know that's even more of your team than I realized. Okay, so Amara, whenever you're ready, I think you can take off, and we'll get going.
Okay, yeah, I don't want to stifle any conversation here. I just figured I would make sure that screen share was working while we're doing some other things. So, all right, well, thank you all for joining today. It's been really interesting to hear these presentations so far. I really enjoyed Daniel's presentation, especially in hearing what he's doing on his farm. So I'm going to be wrapping up the presentation portion of this morning by talking specifically about recognizing natural enemies. And as Caleb mentioned, I'm with the New York State Integrated Pest Management Program, which is a part of Cornell Cooperative Extension, and I'm the biocontrol specialist there. All right, so the two things that we're going to be talking about in the next few minutes, and I'm hoping this will be about 20 minutes, so we should have plenty of time for discussion. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about what I mean by natural enemy. I know, so I've been in this job about 4 years, and when I started, there's all these terms flying around, and I didn't always know what people were talking about. So I like to start with some definitions. And then we're going to just do some practice in recognizing some common natural enemies of pests. I myself am not an entomologist by training, which means that I am only recently learning some of these tips for identifying insects, and I'm hopeful that some of the things I have found helpful may also be helpful to you. I would encourage you at any time to ask questions in the chat. And I know we'll have some time for discussion afterwards, but if there's something you see in a slide and you're like, oh, I'm not sure what that means, I need some more clarification, please feel free to go ahead and put that in the chat. I would much rather get your questions answered than get through the content I've prepared. And then I also like to give people a heads up that I will be asking you to participate today. And we're going to start off with a little bit of participation. When you hear the term natural enemy, what comes to mind? And this could be an example of a natural enemy or some characteristic, just anything you think of. You can go ahead and put that in the chat. Birds, flea beetles, Japanese beetles. Interesting. Okay, so like things that are enemies of your crops on the farm. I hadn't even thought about that aspect of or connotation of natural enemy. That's really interesting. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you for sharing. An animal that preys on something that we might benefit from. Organisms that feed or parasitize on crop pests, parasitic wasps, rabbits. Right, rabbits would be a natural enemy of our crops, at least for me. I had a rabbit that was getting into my garden this summer and it was frustrating. It was a cute rabbit, but I wished it would eat the grass. All right, thank you for sharing. So today when I use the term natural enemy, it's going to be really tightly linked to this idea of biological control. So biocontrol or biological control just means using something living to control pests. And I think very similar definition was shared in the chat. So a classic example would be lady beetles eating aphids. So aphids are a pest. The lady beetle is a biocontrol agent, or we might call it a natural enemy of the pest. And I'll be using these terms, natural enemy and biocontrol agent, interchangeably throughout this presentation. So I like to get that, I like to be clear about that up front. I also want to mention that I'll be using the term bug somewhat loosely in today's presentation. As I mentioned, I'm not an entomologist, but I recognize that especially to entomologists, the bug has a very specific meaning, right? Not all insects are bugs, but commonly when we're talking about things that we're seeing on farms or in gardens, we often use the term bug to just mean anything creepy crawly. And sometimes we mean things that don't even have legs, like slug, that's a bug, you know, it's creepy crawly, it's causing problems. So I just want to acknowledge that. So if you hear me use the term bug in a very loose and non-specific way, that's what's going on there. It's recognizing that we use this language in different ways in different contexts. Also, you probably recognize that technically insects have 6 legs, but there are some other things like spiders and mites that aren't technically insects. They have 8 legs. If you wanted to talk about insects or spiders or mites all together, a more appropriate term might be arthropod. In this presentation, I may use the term insect when I mean something a little bit broader to include spiders and mites. Any questions so far about terminology? Okay, I maybe should have also mentioned this earlier, but I am okay if there is silence on this call. That doesn't bother me, so hopefully it doesn't make you nervous either. I recognize that I am one of what I think are many people. It takes us some time sometimes to formulate our thoughts, so I'm okay with there being a pause when I'm asking for questions, and if there's no questions, I'll move on, but don't get too nervous. All right, and so today, I'm going to be focusing on specifically 2 types of natural enemies, 2 ways that insects function as biocontrol. Predators being one of them, which is a common one we think about. So when I say predator, I just mean an insect that catches and eats pests or maybe feeds them to their young. And so lady beetles are a great example, spiders, ground beetles, some wasps are predators. There's a lot of different predators. And then of course, parasitoids, which would be laying their eggs in or on a pest, and then the larvae hatch, and at some point in their development, they eat and kill the pest. And if you have ever had hornworms on your tomatoes, that's a great example. Hopefully you've seen at some point these little white capsules on the back of the hornworm and been excited because you knew that that hornworm was not going to be around for very long because a wasp was going to hatch out of each one of those capsules. So there are a lot of different parasitoid wasps, but there are also parasitoid flies, and tachinid flies are one example of those. Some things that we won't be talking about today are herbivore natural enemies. So if it's an insect that's feeding on a weed or an invasive plant, it's a natural enemy of that weed. We're not going to talk about those today. We're also not going to talk about beneficial nematodes. So some nematodes are pests, but some nematodes actually kill insect pests. And we like having them around, but that's a topic for another day. Also, we will not be talking about microbial natural enemies, so microbes that are killing pests. All right, so now we've gotten some definitions out of the way, let's move on to some practice with recognizing some common natural enemies. And I like to do this by playing what I call the good bug, bad bug game, just because I think it's more interesting than you just listening to me talk. So what I'm going to do is I will show you a picture of an insect or a bug, an arthropod, and I'm going to ask you, does it look like a good bug, a bad bug, or is it neutral? Is it not really harming or benefiting your crops? And I realize that, so I'm going to ask you to put your answers into the chat. I realize that when you put your answers into the chat, I know personally I feel some hesitancy. Do I have the answer right? Do I have the answer wrong? So what we're going to do is I'll ask you to type your answer into the chat, but not hit enter yet. And then I'll give you a countdown and we'll all hit enter at the same time. So this should be this kind of waterfall of words. So no one will be really paying attention to who got it right, who got it wrong. We'll just get a sense of what all the answers are. All right. So first picture here. Does it look like a good bug or a bad bug or a neutral bug? And hopefully, I'm hoping that you all can see on the screen, but it is red and shiny. It's got some black spots on it. It's got a black and white head. So go ahead and type your response into the chat. And in a moment, I'll give you a countdown and we'll put the answers in all together. All right. 3, 2, 1, go. All right. I'm seeing overwhelmingly good bug. Yes, definitely a good bug. So very commonly recognized good bug, a lady beetle, also called ladybugs, ladybird beetles. They eat soft-bodied pests like aphids, but also whiteflies, thrips, mites, eggs, and they also feed on pollen and nectar. So this will be a recurring theme, and I've tried to make some notes of natural enemies that feed on pollen and nectar because providing these flowers throughout the whole season, as Daniel mentioned, are going to be supporting both pollinators and natural enemies of pests. There are a lot of different species of lady beetles that we see around here. Some of them are native, like this pink spotted lady beetle, which is a little bit less familiar to some people. And some of them are not native, like this really easily recognized 7-spotted lady beetle is not actually a native species. If you have lady beetles that come into your house in the winter and are a pest in that space, it is a multicolored Asian lady beetle, and they still eat pests outside, but they can be irritating if they get into our homes. And the way you can distinguish them, so this little part of the insect behind its head, here's its head and the rest of its body, this is called the pronotum. And the multicolored Asian lady beetles will have an M on their pronotum. So that's how you can tell them apart. All right, next good bug, bad bug. So this one is longer, it's got some spikes on it, it's black and orange. Go ahead and type your answer into the chat and I'll give you a countdown in just a moment. 3, 2, 1, go. I'm seeing a lot of goods. I'm seeing same good bug, couple bad responses. All right. Yes, the people who said that this was exactly the same good bug, they're correct. This is just an immature lady beetle. And I include this picture because it's really important to be able to recognize some of these natural enemies at different stages in their life cycle so that you don't think, oh, it's a pest, because it's not looking like the adult that you recognize. So the larvae of lady beetles, which are these here, here's one example, here's a different species. Depending on the lady beetle species, they may look a little bit different. As someone mentioned in the chat, they are really great predators. They'll eat tons of aphids. Adults will eat aphids too, but the larvae are really voracious aphid eaters. After they go through this larval stage, they'll go through a resting stage where they're called pupae. And they look different, again, from the larvae and also from the adults. And so it's important to know if you notice these on your plants, this isn't something to be worried about. This is something to be excited about because you're going to have adult lady beetles pretty soon. Hopefully, most people on this call recognize that spiders are beneficial, technically arthropods, not insects. Although I realize that some people have a lot of emotions around spiders, and I get that, they do eat a whole lot of arthropods, including some beneficial insects. And some of these predators are generalist predators, and they will eat things that we might like to have around. And that's just part of the way that ecosystems work. So this spider here, it's a little hard to see, but it's actually has caught and is feeding on a small bee. Some spiders may also eat pollen and nectar. Technically, the difference between a spider and a harvestman has to do with the shape of the body. So harvestmen, which you might also know as daddy longlegs, their head and body is kind of all smushed together. It looks like it's just one blob. And spiders will have a clear distinction between where their head is and where their body is. But both of them are predators. Here's our next good bug, bad bug. It's green, it's got lacy wings. This one appears to have red eyes, unless it's just a feature of how I took the picture. So go ahead and type your answer into the chat and I'll give you a countdown in a moment. All right, 3, 2, 1, go. I'm seeing a lot of goods, a couple bads, a couple neutrals. We're gonna do one more picture before we talk about it. What about this one? Good, neutral, or bad? This is a really close up so you can kind of see the detail. It's not, it's actually relatively small in real life. So go ahead and type your response into the chat and we'll all hit enter in 3, 2, 1, go. Some question marks, some good, some bad. All right. This is another situation where these are two different life stages of the same insect. So lacewings are good bugs, and that's what these are. This is an adult green lacewing that I showed you first. There are also brown lacewings. They look relatively similar, but they're brown, and there's more hairs on the lacy part of their wings. And then this is what a larval lacewing looks like. I think they look kind of like alligators. They have pretty big jaws. Here's one that's visiting a flower actually. And they're relatively small, between 1/8 and 3/4 of an inch. And yeah, they do have very cool eggs. So this is another thing to be aware of too. If you see eggs like this on your farm, this is a good thing. I have heard that one idea about why lacewing eggs are in such large stalks is that the larvae, when they first hatch, are really hungry and they will eat each other. And so by laying the eggs in these long stalks, it kind of separates the larvae from each other. And that will prevent a little bit of cannibalism. So they eat a lot of small pests, the larvae do, as I've listed here. Some species, the adults are also predators, and in some species, the adults will only feed on pollen and nectar. Wasps have come up a couple times already. And yes, wasps are also good bugs, beneficial insects. My rule of thumb for wasps is if they're not hurting anyone, leave them alone. This includes things like yellow jackets that can sting people. And so if you have a yellow jacket nest that's in a place where they're posing a stinging hazard to workers or people visiting your farm, that's obviously a problem. But if they're in a place where they're not bothering you, it's good to leave them there because these wasps that live in colonies like yellow jackets and some hornets will eat things like caterpillars. So they're good predators. And then there's a huge diversity of other wasps. Some of them are predators, some of them are parasitoids. This is a really tiny wasp that parasitizes aphids. We talked about the hornworm already and the parasite of the hornworm. A lot of solitary wasps will both feed on pollen and nectar and also be predators. And solitary wasps are much less likely to sting you than these wasps that live in colonies. So definitely leave the solitary wasps alone. All right, another picture here. Good bug, bad bug, or neutral bug. Go ahead and type your response into the chat and we can all hit enter in 3, 2, 1, go. I'm seeing a lot of bad and no thank you. Yes, so this is a tarnish plant bug, a bad bug. It can eat leaves, fruits, flowers. It can damage some fruits and vegetables. This is a coreopsis flower that I was growing, and there's definitely some tarnish plant bug damage on them. They do have this kind of unique pattern on their back of sort of triangles and stripes and these little dots at the end. But yeah, not something that is doing you a lot of good. But they will feed on pollen and nectar, and so they are supported by some of the same plants that are supporting natural enemies of pests. What about this one? This one is enlarged to make it a little easier to see. It's got a pattern of some black and white markings on its back. So go ahead and type into the chat good, bad, or neutral, and you can hit enter in 3, 2, 1, go. A lot of mixed responses on this one. So this one is a minute pirate bug. And so this came up a little bit earlier in the conversation. They're very small, no more than 1/4 of an inch long. And when they're adults, they have this black and white coloration. When they're immature, they're orange. They do look very different. They will eat a lot of small pests like aphids, mites, thrips, and other small insects and eggs. And they'll also feed on pollen and nectar. And so this is actually a minute pirate bug that fell off onto my desk from some flowers I brought into my office, and it's covered in pollen because it's been having a great time in the sunflowers. A little video here, so you can see it running around. This was actually on a corn maze sign, and I think finding the minute pirate bugs might have been my favorite part of the corn maze. What about this one? Black and yellow stripes, really big eyes, good bug, bad bug, or neutral. You can go ahead and put your response in the chat and we'll all hit enter in 3, 2, 1, go. Seeing a lot of goods and neutrals. Yes, this is a hoverfly or a syrphid fly. The syrphid flies are a really big group of insects, and so they come in lots of different shapes and sizes and colors. The adults are pollinators, they'll feed on nectar and pollen, and the larvae are great at eating aphids and some other small pests. So here's a larva here, really doesn't look very impressive, harder to spot. The adults are a lot easier to spot. They can look very similar to bees, as Laura mentioned earlier, because they tend to be black with yellow stripes. The distinguishing features are they have really big eyes that take up almost the whole head. They only have 2 wings, so 1 wing on each side of their body. And when they land, they often hold their wings out to the side. And then if you're watching them fly, they do hover, which is where they got their name. So it's a different flight motion than you'd see with a bee. There are a lot more predatory and parasitoid flies that I'm not going to cover here, partly because I find I'm not good yet at identifying other flies that are good versus bad versus neutral. The hover flies are one that's really easy to identify once you know what you're looking for. What about this one? Good bug, bad bug, or neutral? It's got a pointy nose and it's green. Go ahead and enter, put your response, type your response into the chat, and we'll all hit enter in 3, 2, 1, go. No thanks, bad, yes. This is a leafhopper, and so they'll feed on plant fluids. They have pointy heads, sometimes really sharply pointed, sometimes more rounded point, and they're usually flattened top to bottom. If you're able to look at them closely, like with a magnifying glass, a hand lens, they'll have bristles on their hind legs, and they can be pests on some crops, either directly damaging the crop or transmitting diseases. I just wanted to mention a couple other natural enemies that are on the ground, but are a lot harder to notice. And so one of them is Rove Beetles. They are feeding on a whole variety of soil invertebrates, including slugs, snails, eggs of insects, and thrips. And I think that all of us could use fewer slugs in our gardens or on our farms. They'll also eat seeds, and so they might help out a little bit in reducing your weed seed bank. The distinguishing feature about Rove beetles is the wing covers. So entomologists call these wing covers elytra. They're just these hard covers that go over wings, and it's the part on a lady beetle that would be red with black spots. So in these pictures, you can see here's the wing covers on this Rove beetle, and here's the wing covers here. On the lady beetle, the wing covers cover the whole abdomen, the whole rest of the body of the insect. But on Rove beetles, the wing covers only cover part of the abdomen. And so I think it looks like they're wearing little capes. But because they're on the ground, you're less likely to notice them unless you're looking really carefully. And then Crabid beetles or ground beetles are a huge group of insects that will eat a whole bunch of different arthropods, as well as snails and slugs and seeds. They are usually very fast insects. They'll chase down their prey, and they often have prominent jaws, which you can see here on these tiger beetles. They tend to be black or brown. The tiger beetles are kind of fun because they're brown on top, and on the bottom, they're kind of an iridescent green. But again, really great predators and an insect that is going to shelter in those bunching grasses as well, similar to some of the pollinators. I want to mention that this is certainly not an exhaustive list. There are a lot of natural enemies out there in addition to these, and I can go ahead and put some links into the chat in a bit. There's a guide from Michigan, there's a guide from Oregon State that have some pictures and information about ID. Also, I want to name the fact that insect ID can be difficult, and it's okay. You have local experts who can help you with that, whether it's your local extension agents or other people, other farmers who have experience with insect ID. I did want to mention that one tool I found helpful is this app called Seek by iNaturalist, and it actually lets you take pictures of either insects or plants, and it will try to ID them for you. It's not perfect, and it depends on what kind of picture you got, but sometimes it gets you close enough that you can do some more searching and find out what you're looking for. And if you've used other resources for insect ID that you'd like to share with the group, I'd love for you to put them in the chat. All right, so we played this good bug, bad bug game. I wanted to kind of show you how much you've learned. So I've got 10 pictures here. Take a look at the pictures, and I'd like you to count how many of these are natural enemies, and I'll ask you to type your response in the chat, and we'll all hit enter in a moment. So go ahead and do your counting, and then you can put your answer in, and we can all hit enter in 3, 2, 1, go. Excellent. Well done. Yes. So yes, if you counted 8 natural enemies here, you are correct. The only 2 that are not natural enemies were this Tarnish Plant Bug and this leafhopper. And so that's all I have for this morning. Thank you for being here and thank you for participating. It's always more fun when I have participation. I do post approximately monthly on this blog called Biocontrol Bites, and I have contact information here and social media information if you would like to keep in touch.